Changing a fraction over into a decimal is a good skill to have. Again, rewriting things into different forms. If you have the fraction 3/8, how do we write that into decimal form? Well, this is the same thing as saying 3 divided by 8. So you put 3 divided by 8. We're going to put our decimal point there, and our decimal point there. And we should, well, let's just take this out and let's see how far it goes. Usually you'll have instructions as to how far to take these. 8 doesn't go into 3, but 8 does go into 30. And since we're on the right-hand side of the decimal, that's where our first answer is going to go. So 8 does go into 30, and it goes in 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Then we subtract. 10 minus 4 is 6. And we bring down another 0. Remember, to the right of the decimal point, we can put an infinite number of zeros. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 was always one of those multiplication facts I had trouble remembering when I was younger. 10 minus 6 is going to be 4, and we're going to see a pattern here. 8's going to go into 40 5 times. And guess what? 5 times 8 is 40. We have 0 remainder, so 3/8 comes out to an exact decimal, 0.375, and you can just put the box around the answer just like that. Okay, so you want to show all your steps and put a box around your final answer. We always divide the denominator into the numerator. Okay, now what about taking a decimal and writing it as a fraction? Well, you will need to know those decimal places, and you will be receiving a formula sheet that also has these on it. But let's say we had 0.8. Let's say we have 0.88, and let's say we have 0.612. Okay, let's look at the first one. I know my decimal point's kind of far away from my first number, but it is just 0.8. Now, actually, I should have put 0.8. So you got 0.8. That is in the tenths place. So another way to write this is 8/10. And then we would use the rules that we've already talked about for reducing fractions. 8 can be rewritten as 2 times 2 times 2. 10 can be rewritten as 2 times 5. The 2's can cancel, and what we have left is 2 times 2, which is 4 over 5. So 8/10 is the same, whoop, can't see that, can you? 8/10 is the same as 4/5. Using all the rules of fraction that we've already talked about. Starting with this one, 0.88 or 88/100ths, you look to see what place you have. You have 2 decimal places. That means if I have 2 decimal places, I am dividing that into 100ths. Now, this may be too long to break these down into prime factors. You'd have too many numbers. So just start dividing in numbers that you know will divide. They'll each divide by 2. If you divided that by 2 and divided that by 2, you'd get 44 over 50. They can divide by 2 again. 44 divided by 2 is 22. 50 divided by 2 is 25. And now we can't go any further than that. Okay? So the prime factoring method is great when you've got small numbers. When you've got really large numbers, I don't think we want to write out 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. We don't want to keep writing all the numbers out that it would take. So you just start dividing out. Divide it both by 2, divide them both by 2 again. Many of you would have seen that this divided by 4 in the first step, and you could have done it in one step, and that's fine. Same with this. Now we went out 3 decimal places. That means you had 612/1000ths. If you will look and see that the number of decimal places you have is the same as the number of zeros you have in the denominator. 1 decimal place, 1 0. 2 decimal places, 2 zeros. 3 decimal places, 3 zeros. And again, for time's sake, I'm not going to reduce this, but you would do the same thing. All those little divisibility rules that you learned in maybe the 4th or 5th grade come in great here. How do you know if a number divides by 4? Well, if the last 2 digits divide by 4, or if the number ends in 2 zeros, it will divide by 4, and I can start there. How do you know if a number divides by 2? Even numbers divide by 2. How do you know if a number divides by 5? or by 6, or by 3. And we'll review some of those rules in class because it really speeds up your work right here in reducing these fractions. That's how to change a decimal into a fraction. Now, the only other thing you really need to know about decimals now, since we're into the decimal section, is how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals. We've done it with fractions, so now we're going to do it with decimals. And this is really kind of simple. All you have to do in adding and subtracting the decimals is line up the decimal point and then add straight down or subtract in columns, and you've got it. So let's look at this one. If you had 0.061 and you wanted to add that to 5.0008, and then you wanted to add that to 1.3. Hope that all got on the board. It did. Okay, we're going to do it in columns. We're going to add it in columns, and we're just going to line up the decimal point. So we're going to put 0.061 first. Then we're going to start with the decimal point of the second one, and it's right there. So 5.0008. And then we're going to look at the decimal point in the third one, 1.3. And then we're going to fill in all the missing zeros. Okay? This is where being neat really helps. If you have trouble being neat, you can turn lined paper on its side and use those lines as columns. You can use graph paper, but just try to be very neat. 0 plus 8 plus 0, 1 plus 0 plus 0, 6 plus 0 plus 0, 0 plus 0 plus 3, decimal point, 0 plus 5 plus 1, and there's your answer, and you can box it just like that. Okay, so we would do the same thing with subtraction, only you would have to borrow, and that's fine. But you would put it into columns, and you would subtract it, but always lining up that decimal point. Now, quickly, I want to talk about multiplying and dividing decimals. It's a little bit different, but not difficult. If you have 2.56 times 0.003. And let me just let you in on a little secret. Right now, oh, I put that right in the glare, didn't I? Let me write it over here a little bit so you can see it better. 2.56 times 0.003. Hope that's better. There, that's a little bit better to see. Eventually, when we get into lengthy math problems, we will use the calculator to do some of this arithmetic for us, just because it speeds up the problem. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't know how to do this without a calculator. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to put the one with the least amount of decimal places on the top. So this one only has 2 decimal places. We're going to put that on top. And we're going to put this one on the bottom, 003. Okay? And then we're going to go ahead and start multiplying. 3 times 6 is 18, carry the 1. 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6. Plus 1 is 7. Okay, good, we'll get it. Then we go over to the next decimal point, we put a 0 there, and we have 0 times 6, 0 times 5, 0 times 2. We go to this decimal place, we put down 2 zeros, 0 times 6, 0 times 5, 0 times 2, and now we just add up how many decimal, well, let's add this all together. 8, 5, 7, 0, 0. Now we have 2 decimal places here and 3 here. So all together we have 5 decimal places. And I'm clear off the board again, aren't I? There we go. Can you see that a little bit better? Okay. So then I count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I have 0.0075.